My name is Carlos, and I worked as a night guard and odd job man near the ranch outside Matamoros where rumors walked like dogs. And I will tell you what I saw with my own eyes, what I smelled, what made men I knew turn their faces away. Because this is the story of a man named Adolfo Constanzo, the gang he led, and the terrible pact of blood and power that tied them to the border. And I want you to listen carefully. Because this is not a story told to scare, but a record of real horror. For months before anyone came with sirens and cameras, the ranch had a silence that was wrong, nights where the dogs did not bark, and people moved there who did not speak like the rest of us. Men who wore knives and eyes that watched like hawks. They came with money and swagger, and they called their leader El Padrino, the Godfather. A man named Adolfo who mixed drugs and devotion in ways that made those who sold him loyalty richer and those who followed him quieter. At first I thought they were just another gang, another group sending their boys to the city to sell and collect, but then I saw the pots, the big iron cauldrons that hissed and steamed on small fires in the night, and I saw skulls and bones wrapped in rags, and the men would come with offerings of chickens and goats, and sometimes strange animals that nobody in our town kept, and the air would smell odd, like herbs burned under metal. They called the pot a nana. They said it held power. They said a spirit lived inside it and answered the leader's orders, and I would watch from distance as men danced around it, slapping their chests, cutting their skin to draw blood, believing that bones and flesh mixed into that metal would make them untouchable by cops and enemies. And I tell you this the way I saw it, because later the police would find those pots and call them the center of an occult practice that had crossed into murder. It is true that the gang had clients up the line, men who wanted protection from rivals, men who thought blood could buy safety, and Constanzo promised them power, telling followers that a sacrifice would seal deals, make cash runs safe, and keep bullets from finding their bodies. And for those promises he was paid in fear and obedience, and for that fear he offered human flesh when bones alone seemed to fail him. I remember when the young American came to town. He was laughing with friends outside a bar near the border, and later I heard the news that he had walked off into the dark and did not come back, and the townspeople joked first, then worried as days passed, and I know now that his name was Mark Kilroy, a student on spring break, and that the missing boy became the spark that burned the whole scene into the open, because Constanzo and his men had chosen him for a reason I could not understand. Except that they wanted what they called a superior victim for their nana. The police who came after that were not small men with small badges. They were teams from both sides of the border, men who knocked on doors with paperwork and cameras, and when they searched the Rancho Santa Elena, they found things that made even hardened officers step back. A cauldron with the remains of animals and other things that fit no holy text, bones buried shallow in the dust, wires sticking up from the ground, and a chain of graves that smelled old and wrong, and the stories that the arrested men told in time were of rituals where human life was the final ingredient to make magic work for a criminal cause. I was not there the day they dug up the graves, but the men who came back from the ranch told us what they had seen. They said that they found many bones, that they found traces of burned offerings, that they found evidence of torture, and that one body in particular bore signs of a violent end. And the papers later wrote that investigators found mutilated corpses and items in the nana, and that the killing of the American student made the case into an international manhunt that toppled the veil over a cult that had staggered between drugs and devotion. After the discoveries, people in town spoke in whispers. They used words like satanic. They used words like voodoo and Palo Mayombe, the latter being an Afro-Caribbean practice that Constanzo twisted into a tool for his gang. He took parts of other people's faith and mixed them into something he could sell to criminals who wanted invincibility, and those who followed him marked their bodies with scars. They took oaths and they trusted in the nana until their trust became a weapon against anyone who might oppose them. The man who organized this, the one we called leader, did not live on fear alone. He used sex and charm, and I heard that he had lovers among the group, that he promised women safety in exchange for loyalty, that he mixed drugs with ritual until people who were terrified believed in him like a god, and when the net closed they fled in cars and on foot, some caught, others taken, and the leader, Adolfo Constanzo, when police finally found his apartment in Mexico City, chose death over capture, ordering a follower to end his life as officers raised their guns. And that final act was as theatrical as everything that had come before it, a last command in a life built on commands. There was a woman at his side named Sarah Aldrete, called La Madrina by followers, who the press later painted as a godmother, and she and several other high-ranking members were arrested and tried for their parts in the murders. And the court files and newspaper pages later tied their names to the ranch, and to the spells, and to the gruesome business of turning bones into talismans for cartel men who thought superstition could make them bulletproof. When the truth oozed into daylight, the explanations piled up like wet straw. Some argued this was merely a criminal use of ritual, that blood was power only because men believed it. Others said this was a psychotic conspiracy, a leader's madness turned real through followers who would do anything for him. The news called them Narcosatanists, a name that stitched drugs and ritual into a single monstrous identity for readers to fear. And for all the names and for all the reporters, the result was the same, a ranch full of graves and a list of victims that would not be erased. If you ask me what the worst part was, I will tell you, it was not the pots or the bones. It was the way ordinary men and women changed their faces at night. How friends you had shared coffee with at dawn could become silent when you asked hard questions. How a town learned to lower its voice and hide its children when the cult's cars passed by. And the sickest thing of all was the realization that belief can be bought, that devotion can be paid for, and that some men will trade human life for a feeling of safety under the stars. This is a true story. The events unfolded in 1989 along the Mexico-United States border. The murder of Mark Kilroy at Rancho Santa Elena helped expose Adolfo Constanzo's narco-cult. Police found multiple victims and ritual paraphernalia at the ranch. Constanzo died as officers closed in, and several followers, including Sarah Aldrete, were arrested and later tried for their crimes. And these facts are recorded in contemporary news reports and investigative accounts that track the horror from Matamoros to Mexico City and into courtrooms on both sides of the border. If you ever hear the clank of an iron pot at midnight, and you smell herbs in a place where herbs should not be burned, remember this. Some kinds of evil are not born of ghosts or demons. They are born when greed and superstition meet, and when men decide that power is worth another human life.